Chapter 4. That very morning, Jane had decided to go for a brief walk before heading to school. She didn't have a great night's sleep, as she had sobbed for a while, not having anyone to confide in and lend her a hand. Self pity was her greatest enemy, if there was any. She always felt she had a raw deal in everything, and never realized just actually how lucky she was. Decisions, decisions, decisions. Anyway, she thought that today is a new day and she tried to distract herself from herself. So at break, she would continue reading a newly started Stephen King's novel, and at lunchtime, she'd probably keep going with it. Now, reading was like taking medicine. It soothes pain and instills solace. School had become autonomous. Teaching the same old knowledge she knew since she was little left her mind to seek other means of advancing. After school, she would normally give a grind, meet a friend for a drink, and attend a weekly Irish traditional pub session. She had something planned for every afternoon. Meanwhile, at school there were 5 teachers in total. It being small and disadvantaged, Mrs. Brady, a farmer's wife, was a very knowledgeable and kind lady who only wished well for all living things. Mr. O'Mahony, on the other hand, is a selfish bachelor who really wasn't keen on socializing or teaching for that matter. The head, Catherine, is a singleton and a real busybody, making her very dedicated, while her best friend Dorothy, who is also teaching at school, is an equal workaholic, but is trying to balance a stable relationship with her unique individual interests. Then there is Jane, a sweet, modest young woman who is smart and yet too pessimistic in outlook. Going on to chapter 5. Jane's mum had outlived her father. However, since Jane was little, she had always gotten on better with her father than her mother. From him, she had learned to be patient, friendly, and to give others time. She learned to give people a second chance. However, he suffered a deep depression and ended up taking medication that changed him. He became muted and less active. Whereas although Jane learned many of life's skills from her mother, she always clashed with her, especially on matters of opinions. Her mother was a downright conservative and racist, while Jane was perhaps more like her father. In fact, her mother had threatened to ruin her life after Jane decided to get involved with a foreigner. There'll be nothing left for you here if you're coming back. Really, could a mother say that to her own daughter? Surely her upbringing was just harsh. Jane kept the minimum contact out of respect. She sought the need to break free and live her own life. Therefore, going abroad seemed like a reasonable solution. After all, travel and communication are much more much more convenient nowadays. She had one brother who, from the age of 13, decided not to talk to his sister anymore. Apparently, her mum had suggested ignoring his bliss. He was complex, emotionally unstable, and quite aggressive. At least now he was living that way too. In reality, Jane had more contact with her friends than her family, although realizing at times that family support is required. She also used writing as a way of combating her newly found loneliness and as a great medium to express those innermost emotions and turmoils. Her ex boyfriend turned out to be too selfish to share a life with, and they peacefully went their separate ways. They remained friends and even sometimes wondered if they could try again. Yet right now, both individuals needed space and independence from each other. To quote Shakespeare, what's done is done, and what's done cannot be undone. I think that came from, probably one of his most famous plays. Right, we're coming on to a big chapter here, which is really vital. So we're going to head straight into it. Chapter 6. Mr. Mullen's hardest day was yet to come. The school staff would have to be interviewed in a very careful manner. On entering, he first decided to get the male teacher's opinion, especially seeing that he was the only male teacher in the building. She was a lovely person, extremely friendly and open-minded. She was a treasure to work with. I really don't know how or why she would do that to herself. I'm shocked entirely. Or maybe she had an unpleasant personal life. I don't know, exclaimed Mr. O'Mahony. Mr. Mullins asked him a little about himself and soon realized that this person really had very little to do with any of the other staff members. On the day of Jane's death, he happened to be out on a school tour with his 5th class. Anyhow, he seemed a bit of an island out on his own, never really socializing with staff or the greater community. He struck him as being quite antisocial and the unlikely type to cause harm to anyone. Mrs. Brady, the senior lady who first discovered the dead Jane, had to be called in next, and after a brief introduction, the detective decided to get down to more nitty-gritty details. He proceeded. Yes, I see. Could you go on to describe Jane in a little bit more detail? I had known her since she was little. She was pessimistic about matters. I remember one day she went on about life and about living to die. She was quite philosophical. I mean, she would think and rethink over matters, perhaps analysing life too much, and well, maybe she was never really happy. I believe she tried very hard, almost overdoing it, in order to please others than herself. She was an independent and capable person, but was dependent on what others thought of her. I guess she got frustrated with herself and her faults rather than just letting herself go and enjoying life, stated and assured Mrs. Brady. Indeed, it seemed that Mrs. Brady knew Jane quite personally, and in fact, Jane had lived with Mrs. Brady for a while before she had found her own place. She was like a mother to her. There was always a great sense of trust in talking about one's feelings and botherings. Then, just at this point, Mr. Mullins thought that it was time to give some information. She didn't do away with herself. We are sure there is no medical condition either. However, we are certain that this must be some kind of assassination. Mrs. Brady, astounded by this deduction, blabbed out, "Well, I most certainly had nothing to do with that. It must have been a partner, a family member." He then felt that he had to push the boat out a little bit further. "Tell me about yourself, Mrs. Brady. Maybe you can mention some names as to who we should suspect," continued the determined detective, now tapping his pen against the table in slight agitation. "Well, her ex for sure, and any family members, I guess, could be suspected. I would look into her cousins as well and any relatives abroad. As for myself, I'm a trained teacher and vet," concluded Mrs. Brady. He ploughed on Mr. Mullins by saying, "One more question, Mrs. Brady. When did you last see Jane?" "On that break. She grabbed the tea and headed back upstairs, and she did seem pale-faced, come to think of it." "Thank you for your contribution. If there is anything else that arises, you will be in contact with us, I believe," he stated in a matter-of-fact manner. He was almost certain that she knew more than she was letting on. He was definitely holding back a lot of confidential. She was definitely holding back a lot of confidential evidence between the two. This whole case was actually beginning to get really on his nerves, as it was just far more complicated than he had expected. Who could have removed blood from a body? And most importantly, why? A doctor or someone highly trained in medicine was all he could imagine. He was sure that in the end there would be a commonsensical reason for it all, but right now the mystery was baffling at large. Catherine, the school's headmistress, was the third person in order of importance and relevance to interview. "I know very little about her. She's a hard-working, very good person. She's innocent, though, and too nice, but not dumb. If anyone wanted her dead, then it was someone closely related, probably a family member or friend in her private life. This has been an immense shock to the whole community, and we can't understand who and how someone would have come in to do this and so quickly at school. We now have security cameras installed in all entrances. I restate, no one entered the school building between 9 a.m. and 11 a.m. that day," claimed the confident head teacher. "Well, thank you, Catherine. Do you think anyone might have been jealous of Jane, maybe a female friend or work companion?" Mr. Mullins continued inquiringly, sensing her cold disposture. "Jealous? Really, I don't think so. We're all professionals here. Maybe someone outside of the school community," hesitated Catherine, knowing that in fact she despised Jane for her intelligence and good looks. He eyed her up and down, noticing the latest fashion, but also her shortness of intelligence. She was simply a copycat, a follower. A true detective not only had to be analytical on all fronts, but also skeptical of everyone and every detail. Body language reveals a lot. Catherine did not appear comfortable at all. "When did you last see Jane that day, Catherine?" he spurred on. "She came in the main doors this morning looking quite anxious, clutching a book so tightly that her knuckles were blue," answered Catherine. Indeed, Mr. Mullins knew that this book was central to the case, as Jane didn't seem to go anywhere without it. This book would have to be read as soon as possible. Catherine had proven helpful, but untrustworthy, and he still had Dorothy left as the last teacher in the building to interview. This ultra-slim, bitter-faced lady did claim that she was jealous of Jane's skills and abilities. Apparently, she especially envied her at the university level, but that under no circumstances was that she was even capable of killing another person, especially in such an elaborate manner. Tell me a little bit more about yourself, Dorothy, insisted the detective. Well, there's not so much to say really. I've many hobbies. I enjoy collecting red stuff, you see. I've a red room at home. It's like a huge scrapbook once full. I'll sell the stuff and then choose another colour, chuckled Donna nervous Dorothy. And well, anything else you do a lot of? I got married, so I hang out with my friends. They're not teachers, one's a doctor, a lawyer, and there's an office worker. I also like to observe folk pass by, see what they're wearing, listen to what they're saying. One can learn an awful lot from others. Dorothy had nothing to hide and was indeed very innocent and absent-minded, eccentric. Actually, Dorothy herself was starting to enjoy the detective's questions. A man's attention is always welcome. He, on the other hand, sensed her oddity and knew that it could instantly discard that he could instantly discard her as a suspect. Thus, coming to the overall conclusion that the school staff were not the kind to commit such a crime, but rather were useful in putting more of the puzzle pieces together. Chapter 7. The lanky, bald Mr. Mullins sat swinging on his swivel chair, twitching his red beard with his upper lip. He was quite young to be so bad, but he had these vibrant green eyes. He tended to play with his beard when thinking deeply. He rightfully and purposefully interviewed the school staff before Jane's family, as that was where the crime scene was, and he couldn't risk the case being sabotaged by someone saying something at the wrong time. Throughout his extensive career, he had learned the hard way that timing was key in solving crimes. Therefore, he would next and urgently interview as many of her family members as possible. Again, this had to be done sooner rather than later. First up was the mother, who was in a tattered state. She just about managed to hold it together and let out some very relevant pieces of information. According to her, Jane was overly critical of herself and was quite dark in her thoughts. She revealed that her husband, Jane's father, shared a similar personality and had already talked about killing himself. She assumed, that Jane might have taken this route, although she didn't quite seem convinced of the matter. She knew that her daughter was on good terms with her ex, and that he seemed a very genuine guy, and most definitely not a bad person. Jane, though, had a slight depression with her newfound life. She had sacrificed a lot of things she was used to, and relearned new systems which demanded surpassing linguistic, cultural, and educational obstacles. Indeed, not an easy task. Maybe she felt she had gotten herself into a hole. When she discovered that her daughter's blood had been sucked out, she firstly couldn't believe this, and secondly she pointed the finger at a professional, maybe a doctor whom Jane saw regularly. It could have easily been a poison as well that she maybe had drank. Maybe it was the ex behind it all trying to claim Jane's saving. However, the fact that this tragedy ended the way it did made her presume that it must have been a highly skilled killer. She claimed that she had a hunch about it all and that her premonitions were always right, that it was something or someone not too far away and that Jane did something to make her deserve this. Unfortunately, she claimed that maybe somebody was in love with her. The mother is clearly a firm advocate of the philosophy that one is the creator of one's own destiny. The detective knew straight away that this tough lady had something more to do with it all, as, after all, she knew her daughter best. After such and talking to her dad, Mr. Mullins knew he would have to observe Jane's distant brother for a while and try and interview him. Jane's dad did reveal the truth about the family's relationships. Jane was a bit of an island, not getting on with anyone really, and the family itself was just about holding it together. He did mention that the brother was a black sheep, and apparently he himself, due to stress, was put on antidepressants for many years. Mr. Mullins knew that Jane's dad had pointed him in the right direction. The detective decided to check, see if this brother had any criminal records. He would watch him go to work and socialize. He did not like at all what he saw, and there were most definitely anger management problems. The other seemed skilled and freaky enough to commit a serious crime. He handled specific weaponry and had a lot of military knowledge given his training. Yet what would he have gained from this? Jane hadn't anything to do with her brother for over a decade now, but this guy would get pleasure out of the most sadistic action. Nonetheless, Mr. Mullins thought real motives. Sorry about the dog barking there, but I'm used to it. The next closest in kin was her ex, a man whom a lot of suspicion can easily fall upon. But what was his side of the story? I'm heartbroken and still am. I am extremely sad at what has happened, cried her ex as he looked immensely affected and white with shock. I'm just as determined as you are to find out who did this crime, and I can help you with this investigation. Firstly, however, I swear that had nothing to do with her death. I was at work all day. I have many witnesses to this. We weren't living together at the time, but we parted on very good terms. I was thinking of suggesting that we try and live together again. In fact, this weekend we were going. Huge sobs and tears rolled down his pale cheeks. We will talk about it, he managed to continue. I will do everything I can to solve this mystery. I know that her brother was always an enemy since childhood. Although Jane might have killed herself, she was um, stronger willed than seemed. Nevertheless, there was no way that she would be able to extract blood from her body. So after a brief pause, this broad, dark-haired young man added, "For sure she wasn't a coward, because those who talk black aren't really the ones who do away with themselves in the end." So to the ears of the detective, it sounded like her ex had a lot of faith in her, and that he was right somehow about many things. There appeared no motive to kill Jane, given that the guy was loaded and truly emotionally upset. So 2 months later, Mr. Mullins had narrowed down his search to the mum and the brother. Then out of the blue an event occurred that opened up a whole new light in the case, something that he had read in a book. In the book that was found by Jane's side when she died. The book, this important book, right, that she was holding on to, was called The Leprechaun's Revenge. Here it goes. So he had safely kept all evidence found at the crime scene and had analysed every piece of evidence many times over. It never occurred to him to read this book, though, until now. Although he kind of did think about looking at it at the beginning, didn't he? The back described the story as a fascinating intrigue with many twists and loopholes that eventually become solved in a highly imaginative read, whereby a young lady leaves her homeland and begins to establish a new life when odd events begin to happen. Sometimes it becomes clear that it's too late to find a solution and the locals are discarded from being suspects, while a strange paranormal force takes over. One's destiny comes into full play despite what one may do to avoid it. So before attempting the book, the tired detective resorted to a quick internet search in it. Comments such as, "Don't read this book, it's a complete waste of time. It's a chilling tale with a disturbing ending," came up. Mr. Mullins looked into the readers themselves and to unsettlingly discover that some of them died not so long after writing their comments. Such thorough research was done as one of the critics has stated, "I really must tell you that I think this book is killing me." Perhaps it was all one huge coincidence, but Mr. Mullins was now even more concerned about the case. Things happen for a reason, and he was now convinced that the book would have to be read from top to bottom to suss things out. We're nearly there. We've only got about 4 pages left in the story. Chapter 8. As for Jane's past, it turns out that she suffered nostalgia over many years. However, she survived through various ingenious solutions. Thanks to the internet, she discovered that she could listen to the humour she missed, and she could keep up with her language and cook up those food she couldn't get abroad. One could say that she was suffering from chronic homesickness. Her writings brought to light many truths. They revealed how even though work was never the same out there, nor the people with their customs and manners, it was in Jane's words worth sticking out like a sore thumb and trying to hide her cultural arrogance. She wrote about how hard it was to continue on when, in her words, feeling alien, she longed for similarity. She would often read books that would remind her of her homeland, but most of all, she missed her people's mentality and friendliness. The Leprechaun's Revenge was one such book that she recently bought online. In spite of it all, she did succeed in making a home away from home, and interestingly, she came into balance and combined two worlds in one. Meantime, Mr. Mullins munches hastily on his popcorn and twitches his beard while all proceeding to read the book. So he's getting into it now, and it seems obvious how parallel the story was with Jane's life story. The tale begins with a young maiden who digs up a fairy fort at the back of her family home in order to start up a vegetable patch. A very happy leprechaun used to reside there until his home was ruined, and as a result, he becomes very bitter for many years. Suddenly, the patch falls into disuse, and when she leaves the country, her emigration is caused by her desire to find the love of her life and fulfill her dream. Most of all, it is a test on the self. Can I survive, and how will it all turn out? She felt huge urge to take this risk. Abroad, she lives a very fruitful life, gains all she had ever dreamt of until she starts off a new vegetable patch. It is so unsuccessful that she falls into despair and frustration. It either dries up, killing all the plants, or is attacked by constant plagues. This havoc then spreads into the house, whereby gradual problems begin to appear, such as cracks and floorboard movements. Thereafter, her relationships begin to fall apart, beginning with her family, friends, and ending with her ex. Her whole world, which was previously so perfect, was now rapidly crumbling. Ironically and sadistically, could these circumstances have happened to Jane? In reality, did she know this? Thought the detective, who had yet to reach the final chapter of this god-forsaken novel. I don't have a glass of water here to sup from, but we're almost there now. 2 more pages to go. Chapter 9. Days pass with Mr. Mullins glued to the book in his office. His fellow apprentice, Mr. Diggs, starts to get worried. Sir, what can I do to help you? Should I interview anyone else? Mr. Mullins grumbles a reply. This is quite unlike the detective. But then again, he is concentrating, and when he does so, it is not best not to disturb him. Mr. Diggs then decides to let him to it, so he leaves the premises. He shouldn't have read the book. At the end of the novel, and quite bleakly, the young maiden dies and is also left bloodless. The sneaky leprechaun reappears at her death with a wide grin. In his rugged hand, he holds a jam jar full of her blood. Mr. Mullins could only imagine the many litres that would have been drained out. The little green man does conclude that one only gets what one deserves, thus leaving your roots, you forever will cause one to repent eternally. Yet if you ever uproot the fairies, happiness, then your life is in their hands. Through magic and magic alone can a skilful fairy doctor cut one slit in a vein and one in an artery and place in a tube that connects to a jam jar. Once entering the jar, the blood starts to evaporate until only half a litre precisely is left unevaporated and the jar is sealed. This is an easy way to transport it, and the minuscule slits self-heal in no time. Nevertheless, the detective still had one more question. How can such a fictional novel lead to a real-life murder? Could it be that Jane provoked the fairies and they'd gotten their revenge? So are you finished? Inquires the now impatient Mr. Diggs. The surgeon answered all. In fact, he seemed asleep in his chair. Mr. Diggs went to take the book from his hands when he noticed how pale the detective appeared. He unhesitatingly checked the detective's pulse to surprisingly feel none. He rang for the ambulance and noticed how the book had a sentence highlighted in fluorescent. Cindy dies bloodless. The same thing happened to the detective. He's dead. Oh my God, what a story. The epilogue anyway, we're not finished yet. The next day, Mr. Mullins is declared dead, and indeed bloodless. Mr. Diggs, astounded by such a coincidence, decides to lock the book up in the office's top secret safe. He has to close the case on Jane as a top secret file, stating that she died of natural circumstances and by an unexplained literally paranormal interference. He had no choice but to cover up reality and send this case to the FBI for further investigation, as they specialize in the paranormal activity. But the public didn't need to know that. In fact, most of the time, the public rarely are even told the truth. So the police arrived that morning to take Mr. Diggs away for trial. Although we, as the readers, know that he's innocent, his fingerprints were found at the scene of Mr. Mullins' death. Far away, the little green man, with his sack of jam jars, was back on his own soil. He's busy filling his well with Jane's and Mr. Mullins' blood, which consequently, would be renewed through the ground's natural filtration system, which then would give life to the afterlife. After all, he was doing his job to his best, being a worker for Mother Nature. All life must lead to new life. As it is in this way, the soul is cleansed by bringing it back to peace and harmony. Jane never really did die, but rather become transformed. And as for Mr. Mullins, well, he shouldn't have interfered, so it was his destiny as well. Whoever said, anyway, that fairies don't exist. The end. And that's the actual title of the book. Fairies, sure, they don't exist. And it's nice the way it ends, isn't it? Whoever said that fairies don't exist? So, the lesson to be learned in that book is karma. Watch your words, watch your actions, fix up your life. If you do, everyone else is going to watch their words and actions. We're all going to fix this life together, because payback comes. And maybe the Irish use payback as a warning, as a lesson to teach people about the universal law of karma, you know. So also, I mean, like, just having reread the book there again after many years, I was thinking, you know, curses, how there can be very dominant in family systems as well, and passed on from one generation to the next unless they're broken. And then I got into specializing in breaking them, and it's really, really important to do so, but you can only do that in energetic healing, constellation work. You really got to be good, you really got to know how to do it, you really got to be well trained. I've been lucky where my destiny has led me onto that. So yeah, Sure Fairies don't exist. Angels do exist. I do know that for sure. And if you want to know more about that, my energy blockage removal protocol is all angelic. They do all the work basically. I'm the channel. And it's true, and it works. And I've been a girl, as you know, who didn't believe in any of all of this long time ago. I thought a load of rubbish, but I always knew inside, you know, there's more to life than just the physical. There's something else going on. There's something predetermined. This energy world, I felt, was always powerful, and that was behind everything that's happening, you know. And until I actually got into really studying it and dealing with how to heal it and how to work with it, then I realized that this is the world. Yeah, this is it. So I'm so thankful. Hope you enjoyed my first book. I'll just give you a briefing on what's coming up next. I wrote a trilogy called the Eternal Wish Trilogy. So we got book 1, The Eternal Wish, book 2, Another Wish, and The Ultimate Wish. Fabulous books. Trilogy. Love these stories. They're really good. Really good. I mean, they're all short novels, all linked together, a lot going on. This kind of was based on more real life situations, but that is the Wish. The Wish trilogy is usually fantastical realism. It's amazing. Fantasy, pure fantasy realism. That's also there. The Queen of Gods, also a nice political love book. Good one really good one to read as well, by the fireside. The Femagogs and the Lost Code. Okay, I left it at that, the title in the end. Marvelous book. This is probably my longest novel. It's a work of art. Why? Because it's a masterpiece, because it's such a long novel. It's got the fantasy, it's got the description, it's got all the politics, it's got all the emotions in it. It's got huge climatical changes, got superpower, destiny. I was going to probably do a follow-up book onto that, but I managed to say, no, I'm going to do the one big huge novel here, so I managed to do that. Hey, that's not bad going. It took me 5 years to finally finish. I was only writing bits now and again, but that's the masterpiece, although they all really are, to be honest with you, because they're all each individual stories, you know, they're all really good. And this one as well, The Force of One. This is just something else, man. This is quite brief, but really pictorial. I mean, there's a lot of visual imagery in it, a lot of learning. Again, I deal with karma again and transformation. It's a world I love, and characters and fantasy. It's my style, but each story is so different, really. Although there may be similar lessons throughout in some way or another, the stories are just totally original. None of these books are repetitive in any way. You'd never think they were written by the same person. And that's the cool thing about these books. So where do I go from here? I mean, I did start to write my own autobiography, which I thought was going to be pretty cool, called The Heroine Within. And that one really does deserve its to be published. Maybe that one is 100% then nonfiction realism compared to all the other fictional books with their non-fictional pieces. I also wrote a whole collection of poetry, some very deep, sad stuff, some more uplifting stuff, and I just kind of didn't want to do any more on that. There are these books I did want to get out of my system. Where would I go next? Who knows? It's a question I have at the back of my mind. The autobiography, yeah, but again, it's not like a whole dramatic story made up. But to enjoy also reading from other authors is important. And if I feel the urge to write again and I've got a good idea, then I would do that. So they're the books at the moment. I mean, it's what comes out your system. You can't really force yourself, if you know what I mean. Although I'm sure that if you really said, right, I need to write something, then you get on to doing it. So you got to go for it. It's time, it's dedication, it's hard work, it's a lot of planning, but it's great work for the mind and for the spirit. It's therapy as well. Love you all, enjoy my books, and keep following me.